Some people think a garden is just dirt and flowers. The HOA thought the same thing right up until an entire town turned against them. The sound hit first, metal scraping against stone at 5:42 in the morning. Then came the low growl of a maintenance truck engine outside my bedroom window, followed by the sharp crunch of wooden planter boxes splitting apart under heavy tires. I was halfway down the hallway before I even realized I was barefoot. The cold hardwood floor bit into my feet as I yanked open the front door, and the smell of wet soil and gasoline slammed into me at the same time. My garden was gone. Not dying. Not damaged. Gone. Bright red tomato vines lay crushed into the sidewalk like somebody had dragged them through a parking lot. The cedar beds my 8th graders built for me last spring were snapped in half and tossed against the curb beside black trash bags full of ripped roots and broken flower stems. Water hissed from a severed irrigation hose, spraying mud across the driveway in uneven bursts. And standing in the middle of it all, wearing a cream-colored tracksuit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill, was Brenda Whitmore, HOA president. Her blonde hair looked perfect even at sunrise. Not a strand out of place. She held a clipboard against her chest like it was some kind of badge. "You were warned, Emily," she said calmly while one of the workers ripped down the little wooden sign near the fence. The sign cracked as it hit the pavement. "Students' Harvest Program." I stared at it lying there in the mud, and something inside my chest tightened so hard I could barely breathe. "This is private property," I finally said, my voice sounding smaller than I wanted. Brenda smiled the way rich people smile when they already think they've won. "This neighborhood has standards." The worker nearest the herb boxes avoided eye contact with me as he shoveled lavender plants into a contractor bag. The smell hit the air immediately. Fresh lavender. Rosemary. Wet dirt. It mixed with diesel fumes from the truck until the whole street smelled like a garden center sitting behind an auto shop. My hands were shaking now, but not from fear. From disbelief. Because this wasn't some decorative backyard project. Those raised beds fed 6 families last winter. The peppers growing near the side fence were planted by a sophomore named Lily whose dad lost his job after a heart attack. The cucumbers climbing the wire trellis came from seeds one of my students brought back after visiting his grandfather's farm in Oklahoma. Every inch of that garden had a story attached to it. Every flower, every row, every chipped brick around the border. And Brenda was tearing through it like she was clearing weeds from a sidewalk crack. The morning sprinklers around Willowbrook Estates clicked on one by one across the neighborhood. Perfect green lawns sprayed in synchronized arcs while my garden bled mud into the gutter. Curtains started moving behind windows up and down the cul-de-sac. Neighbors were watching. Nobody stepped outside. Brenda flipped a page on her clipboard. Repeated violations. Unauthorized agricultural use. Visual inconsistency with community presentation guidelines. I actually laughed when she said that. Not because it was funny. Because hearing those words while crushed sunflowers lay scattered across my driveway felt completely insane. One of the workers lifted another wooden planter box into the truck bed, and I recognized the faded blue handprints painted across the side. My students made those during Earth Week 3 years ago. Tiny handprints layered over each other in crooked rows. Some of those kids were in college now. One of them was gone entirely. Cancer took him the year after he painted that box. And now I was standing there in my pajamas watching strangers throw his handprint into a dumpster before sunrise. I did not sleep that night. The smell of torn basil and soaked dirt still clung to the air long after the maintenance truck disappeared around the corner. By sunrise, the whole backyard looked hollow, like somebody had scooped the life out of it with a shovel and left only mud behind. I stood at the kitchen sink holding a chipped coffee mug that had gone cold 20 minutes earlier while rainwater dripped from the broken irrigation line outside. Every few seconds came another soft plink against the patio stones. The silence between those sounds somehow felt louder than the truck engine had. My name is Emily Carter. I am 42 years old, and for the last 18 years I have taught biology at West Ridge Middle School, just outside Columbus, Ohio. Most people probably imagine teachers going home after class to quiet little lives filled with grading papers and drinking tea under blankets. I used to think that too when I first started teaching. Then real life happened. My husband Daniel died 11 years ago from pancreatic cancer 2 weeks before Christmas. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee from the nurse's station, and I still cannot walk into certain waiting rooms without hearing the rhythm of those machines in my head again. After he passed, the garden became the only place where my mind stopped spinning long enough to breathe. It started small. One raised bed, a few tomatoes, some lavender because Daniel loved the smell. Then one spring, a student named Ava stayed after class while everybody else rushed to the buses. She asked if she could help plant seedlings because her mother worked double shifts and never had time to garden at home. The next week, she brought another student. Then another. Before long, every Saturday morning my backyard sounded like laughter, shovels scraping dirt, and kids arguing over whether peppers counted as fruits or vegetables. Some of those children came from homes where the refrigerator hummed louder than conversations. Some came from houses where nobody asked how their day went. But in that garden, they mattered. I made sure they knew it. During the pandemic years, things got worse around town. Parents lost jobs. Grocery prices climbed. The local food pantry started rationing canned vegetables. So we expanded the garden. More beds, more irrigation hoses, more produce. We called it the Students' Harvest Program because I wanted the kids to feel ownership over something good for once. Every Wednesday after school, we packed paper bags with tomatoes, cucumbers, lettuce, squash, and herbs for families who needed extra groceries. Quietly. No cameras. No speeches. Just food. The wooden sign Brenda snapped in half that morning was painted by a 7th grader named Marcus whose father had been deployed overseas. He spent 2 hours carefully outlining every letter while dirt covered his sneakers and sunscreen streaked across his cheeks. I still remember him grinning when we mounted the sign beside the fence. That garden carried pieces of people inside it. Tiny pieces maybe, but real ones. Which is why watching Brenda call it visual clutter felt like somebody walking into a church and complaining about the color of the candles. Around 9, that morning my phone started buzzing nonstop across the kitchen counter. Parent messages, student emails, pictures from neighbors who had secretly recorded the maintenance crew from behind their blinds. One message stopped me cold. It came from Lily, the sophomore whose family depended on our produce boxes last winter. Miss Carter, she wrote, please tell me they did not destroy the whole garden. I stared at the screen while the smell of wet rosemary drifted through the cracked kitchen window, and for the first time since Brenda arrived with that clipboard, I realized this was no longer just about flowers. By Monday afternoon, the entire neighborhood smelled like fresh mulch and passive aggression. Landscaping crews hired by the HOA were planting identical white hydrangea bushes along the subdivision entrance, while my destroyed garden still sat in garbage bags at the curb waiting for pickup. That contrast alone told you everything you needed to know about Willowbrook Estates. Perfect appearances mattered more than actual people. The strange part was how quickly Brenda shifted from pretending this was about rules to making it personal. I walked into the HOA office carrying a folder thick with city permits, nonprofit paperwork, and photos of the produce program, hoping maybe there had been some misunderstanding buried beneath all the arrogance. The office sat beside the community pool in a fake brick building designed to look important. Inside smelled like lemon cleaner and printer toner. Brenda barely looked up from her laptop when I entered. You cannot just destroy private property because you dislike vegetables, I said, laying the documents on her desk. She adjusted the pearl bracelet around her wrist before finally glancing at the top page. This is not about vegetables, Emily. It is about preserving the image of the neighborhood. The way she said image made it sound sacred, like property values were somehow more important than the families those vegetables fed. I pointed toward the photos. These are students, children, teenagers wandering through yards every weekend carrying tools and bags of soil is not the environment residents here invested in. Her voice stayed perfectly calm, which somehow made it worse. Outside the office window, I could hear kids splashing in the community pool while sprinklers ticked across the grass in steady mechanical bursts. Brenda slid a new document toward me across the desk. Another violation notice. $300 for unauthorized community gatherings. $200 for exterior storage containers. $400 for unapproved irrigation modifications. I stared at the numbers while the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry insects. You are fining me for watering plants, I asked quietly. Brenda folded her hands together. I am fining you for refusing to comply. That was the moment I understood something important. This woman did not hate the garden because it broke rules. She hated it because it represented something she could not control. Kids showing up after school with muddy shoes and grocery bags did not fit the polished little fantasy she sold at HOA meetings. She wanted identical lawns, silent streets, and neighbors who smiled during barbecues while pretending nobody struggled financially. A working garden ruined the illusion. Things escalated fast after that meeting. By Wednesday, somebody from the HOA had shut off the exterior water line connected to my backyard spigot. I discovered it at sunrise when I turned the faucet handle and heard nothing except a dry metallic cough inside the pipe. The remaining plants sagged under the August heat. Wilted spinach leaves curled inward like burned paper. I ended up carrying 5-gallon buckets from the kitchen sink through the back door one trip at a time while sweat-soaked. Through my shirt. Halfway through the third bucket, I noticed Brenda standing across the street beside her mailbox watching me. Not helping, just watching. Her sunglasses reflected the morning light so brightly I could not even see her eyes. Later that afternoon, somebody posted photos of my damaged yard on the neighborhood Facebook page. The caption read, "This is what happens when residential homes become mini farms." Comments piled up underneath. Some defended me. Others complained about traffic, dirt, and appearances. Then Brenda herself replied, "Community standards exist for a reason." I sat at my kitchen table reading those words while cicadas screamed outside in the summer heat and muddy footprints dried across my floor from hauling water all morning. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Lily. Then another from a former student named Noah Bennett. Then 5 more messages after that. And slowly, for the first time all week, the silence around me started breaking. The first person to show up was Noah Bennett at exactly 7:14 Thursday morning carrying a legal pad, 2 iced coffees, and the kind of exhausted expression people get after working overnight shifts. I had not seen him in almost 8 years, but I recognized him immediately. Same crooked nose from the baseball accident in 8th grade. Same nervous habit of rubbing the back of his neck while thinking. Only difference now was the navy suit and the silver attorney badge clipped to his belt. The smell of fresh coffee drifted through the humid morning air as he stepped carefully around broken planter boards still stacked beside my garage. "Miss Carter," he said softly, looking across the ruined backyard. I thought Lily was exaggerating. For a second, neither of us spoke. Cicadas buzzed in the maple trees overhead, while the last surviving sunflower leaned sideways in the heat near the fence line. Noah crouched beside one of the damaged garden beds and ran his hand along the cracked cedar edge with the same careful focus he used to show during science labs. "I built this one," he muttered quietly. Then he stood up, adjusted his tie, and the expression on his face changed completely. Calm, focused, dangerous in the legal kind of way. He spent the next hour flipping through every violation notice Brenda had sent me over the past 6 months. The stack had grown so thick it barely fit inside the folder anymore. Pages covered my kitchen table, while ceiling fans pushed warm August air around the room, carrying the faint smell of dirt still clinging to my clothes. Noah read everything twice. Then he laughed once under his breath. "This woman is making up half these rules." I blinked at him. "What do you mean making them up?" He tapped one of the notices with his pen. "Educational gardening restrictions are not in the HOA bylaws. Neither are fines for volunteer gatherings." She added language under discretionary enforcement authority and hoped nobody would challenge it. Outside, thunder rumbled somewhere far off beyond the subdivision. Summer storms building over Ohio cornfields always sounded slow and heavy like giant trucks rolling across the sky. Noah kept reading. The deeper he went, the quieter he became. Then he stopped suddenly on one particular page and stared at it for several seconds. "Emily," he said carefully, "did Brenda ever explain where all the landscaping funds are going?" I shook my head. "Why?" He slid the paper toward me. "Last year alone, the HOA approved nearly $80,000 for decorative entrance maintenance, irrigation improvements, and beautification contracts." The amount made my stomach tighten immediately. Willowbrook Estates looked polished, sure, but not $80,000 polished. Noah pulled out his phone and started typing rapidly. "My firm handles nonprofit compliance cases sometimes," he explained. "This kind of spending leaves paper trails." By noon, the storm finally broke overhead. Rain hammered the roof hard enough to drown out conversation, while muddy water pooled along the damaged backyard beds. Noah stayed another 3 hours digging through online public records at my kitchen table while I salvaged whatever plants I could from the wreckage outside. The rain smelled clean against the hot pavement. Earthworms surfaced through the soaked soil. A broken tomato vine still clung stubbornly to one surviving trellis despite everything. Around 4 o'clock, my phone buzzed again. Then again, and again. Messages flooded faster than I could read them. Former students, parents, teachers. Photos started appearing online from every angle imaginable. Neighbors had security footage of the HOA crew destroying the garden before sunrise. Someone uploaded drone footage showing the entire backyard after the demolition. Another student made side-by-side images comparing my produce donations to the HOA violation notices. One post alone gained 12,000 shares before dinner. Noah leaned back in his chair staring at the screen while rainwater dripped steadily from the gutters outside. "I do not think Brenda understands what she just stepped into," he said quietly. Right then, another notification appeared across my phone from a local news station asking for comment. Then another from the Columbus Teachers Association. Then one more message stopped me cold. It came from a former student named Rachel Kim. Last I heard, she worked for the city auditor's office downtown. Her message was only one sentence long. "Tell Noah not to file anything yet, because I think your HOA has a much bigger problem." Friday morning smelled like rain-soaked mulch and fresh printer ink. By 6:30, my kitchen counter had disappeared beneath stacks of screenshots, HOA documents, city code printouts, and handwritten notes from former students scattered across every available inch of space. The coffee maker hissed nonstop beside Noah's laptop while thunderclouds rolled low over Willowbrook Estates outside my windows. I had taught science long enough to recognize pressure building before a storm finally breaks. That house felt exactly like that. Tight, charged, waiting. Rachel Kim arrived carrying 2 banker boxes filled with public records requests and enough energy to power the entire subdivision. She used to sit in the front row of my biology class doodling tiny cartoons of mitochondria in her notebook margins. Now she worked for the county auditor's office and wore sharp gray blazers that made her look about 10 years older than 30. The second she walked into my kitchen, she froze at the sight of the destroyed backyard through the sliding glass door. "Oh my God," she whispered. Even with the rain washing mud into the grass, the damage still looked brutal in a quiet suburban kind of way. Broken cedar boards leaned against the fence. Empty irrigation tubing snaked through puddles like dead vines. Rachel set the boxes down carefully and exhaled through her nose. "Okay," she said, suddenly all business again. "I think your HOA president has been using beautification contracts to funnel money through relatives." Noah looked up so fast his chair wheels squeaked against the hardwood floor. The smell of wet earth drifted through the screen door while Rachel started spreading papers across the table. Landscaping invoices, contractor permits, tax filings, maintenance agreements. Every page painted the same ugly picture. Brenda had approved thousands of dollars in neighborhood enhancement projects through a landscaping company owned by her brother-in-law. Half the listed work either never happened or cost triple what nearby contractors normally charged. One invoice claimed $12,000 for decorative stone installation near the subdivision entrance. Rachel slid over photos showing the actual work. For tiny flower beds and a wooden sign. "That sign looks like it came from a craft store," Noah muttered. Rachel nodded grimly. "Exactly." Rain tapped steadily against the windows while more former students joined our growing little war room throughout the afternoon. Marcus Delaney arrived carrying camera equipment from the local news station where he worked as a producer. Lily showed up with grocery bags full of salvaged vegetables neighbors had rescued from the curb after the demolition. Another former student named Ethan brought portable floodlights because he said if this thing exploded publicly, people would need footage after sunset. The strangest part was how naturally everyone fell into place. Nobody waited for instructions. Nobody asked whether helping was worth the trouble. They just showed up. Around 4 o'clock, Marcus connected his laptop to the television in my living room and pulled up social media analytics. The hashtag somebody created overnight had already spread far beyond Columbus. Teachers groups, gardening communities, veteran support pages, parents organizations. Thousands of comments flooded every platform imaginable. People were furious, not because flowers got destroyed, because they recognized exactly what kind of person destroys a community garden feeding children and still calls herself civilized afterward. Then came the sound that changed the entire atmosphere in the house. A sharp metallic knock against my front door. 3 fast hits. Everyone froze instinctively. Even the rain outside suddenly seemed quieter. Noah walked over first and opened the door halfway. Brenda stood there beneath a cream-colored umbrella wearing white gloves despite the humidity. Her expensive perfume drifted inside immediately, mixing unpleasantly with coffee and damp soil. She glanced past Noah into the crowded house, and her expression tightened for the first time since this whole thing began. "Emily," she said coldly, "you need to stop encouraging online harassment against the Homeowners Association." Nobody spoke. The only sound came from rainwater dripping steadily off her umbrella onto my porch. Then Marcus slowly lifted the television remote and paused the screen behind us directly on an enlarged image of one of Brenda's landscaping invoices. $12,000. Decorative entrance improvements. Brenda's eyes flicked toward the screen for half a second. That was all Noah needed to see. His voice turned very calm after that. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said quietly, "I think you should probably call your lawyer." Brenda's face changed so fast it almost made me dizzy. 1 second, she stood there wearing that polished country club smile she always used at HOA meetings. The next, her jaw tightened hard enough to sharpen the lines around her mouth. Rainwater dripped from the edge of her umbrella onto my porch in slow, steady taps, while nobody inside the house said a word. Noah stepped forward slightly, still holding one of the invoices in his hand. "You billed residents $31,000 for irrigation redesign last spring," he said calmly. "Interesting considering the county permit office has no record of approved irrigation work anywhere in Willowbrook Estates." Brenda let out a short laugh that sounded brittle around the edges. "You people are getting dangerously close to defamation." Rachel crossed her arms beside the kitchen table. "Public financial records are not defamation." The smell of coffee and wet cedar filled the room, while thunder rolled somewhere beyond the subdivision again. Brenda's eyes flicked around the house, taking inventory now. Cameras, documents, phones recording, former students standing shoulder to shoulder beside the ruined remains of the garden she tried to erase quietly before sunrise. For the first time since this started, she looked uncertain. Then her eyes landed on me. "Emily," she said, softening her voice artificially, "you are allowing these people to manipulate you emotionally." I almost laughed at that. Emotionally. Like the crushed vegetables outside had not fed real families. Like children spending weekends planting food somehow counted as manipulation while threatening teachers with fines did not. Before I could answer, Marcus reached over and turned the television volume up. The local evening news had just started running the story. Drone footage filled the screen showing my backyard after the HOA demolition. Muddy tire tracks cut through smashed planter beds, while the broken Students' Harvest Program sign lay split near the fence. Then came interviews. Parents, neighbors, former students. One woman fought tears while describing how weekly produce bags helped her family survive after medical bills drained their savings last winter. Another parent explained how the garden gave anxious kids a safe place after school during the pandemic. Brenda stared at the television without blinking. Her own landscaping invoices sat spread across my kitchen table beneath the broadcast reflecting off the screen. It looked almost cinematic in the strangest way possible. Then the anchor said the sentence that changed everything. County officials confirmed late this afternoon they are reviewing financial discrepancies tied to Willowbrook Estates' HOA expenditures. Silence hit the room immediately afterward. Heavy silence. The kind that presses against your ribs. Brenda's umbrella tilted slightly in her hand, as if her grip loosened for half a second. Noah finally spoke again. "Mrs. Whitmore, if I were you, I would stop issuing violation notices immediately." She straightened her posture instantly, trying to pull herself back together. "This neighborhood elected me to maintain standards." Rachel shook her head slowly. "No, they elected you to manage an HOA. There is a difference." Brenda's expression hardened again after that. Whatever fear flashed across her face disappeared beneath anger almost instantly. "You think online sympathy changes rules?" she snapped. "This neighborhood was designed to protect property values, not become some public charity project." The words hung in the room like smoke. Nobody interrupted her this time. Nobody needed to. Because the second she said public charity project out loud, she stopped sounding like an administrator and started sounding exactly like what she really was. Outside, headlights swept across the rain-soaked street, as another car pulled into my driveway. Then another. Doors opened. Voices carried through the storm air. Noah glanced through the front window first and smiled slightly. "Well," he said quietly, "looks like the cavalry found the address." I stepped onto the porch and stopped cold. Neighbors lined the curb holding grocery bags, seed trays, flowers, tomato cages, potting soil, and wooden boards under umbrellas in the pouring rain. More cars kept arriving behind them. One little girl stood near the sidewalk, clutching a sunflower almost taller than she was. The smell of wet pavement mixed with fresh soil drifted across the yard while thunder cracked overhead again. And standing in the middle of that growing crowd was Lily holding a handmade cardboard sign against her chest. It read 3 simple words in thick black paint. "Rebuild the garden." The rain kept falling, but nobody left. That was the part one remembered most clearly. Water streamed off umbrellas, soaked through jackets, and turned the curbside grass into slippery mud, yet the crowd outside my house only grew larger by the minute. Pickup trucks lined both sides of the street with their headlights glowing through the storm like rows of lanterns. Somebody unloaded lumber from a trailer. Somebody else carried fresh basil seedlings beneath a plastic tarp. The entire cul-de-sac smelled like wet soil, gasoline, and cut cedar wood. Brenda stood frozen on my porch watching it happen in complete disbelief. I think up until that moment she honestly believed people would stay quiet forever. She was wrong. Lily walked up my driveway, first holding that handmade sign against her chest while rain dripped off the hood of her sweatshirt. "Miss Carter," she called softly, "where do you want us to start?" Before I could even answer, 3 more students headed straight toward the destroyed planter beds carrying shovels and work gloves. One older man from down the block brought a wheelbarrow full of fresh compost. Mrs. Hernandez from 2 streets over showed up with trays of pepper plants balanced carefully in the back seat of her minivan. The little girl with the sunflower handed it directly to me with both hands like she was delivering something important. "My mom said gardens come back," she whispered. I almost cried right there on the porch. Brenda finally found her voice again. "You cannot hold unauthorized gatherings inside the subdivision," she snapped loudly over the rain. Nobody even looked at her. That might have been the first real crack in her armor. All week she had controlled everything through paperwork, fines, and intimidation. But authority only works when people still believe in it. Noah stepped beside me holding his phone toward the street. "You may want to reconsider saying that on camera," he said calmly. I looked closer and realized Marcus had news crews arriving already. Vans from 2 local stations rolled slowly into the neighborhood, with satellite dishes rising above the roofs. Bright portable floodlights flickered on through the rain, while reporters hurried across the street, protecting microphones beneath jackets. The entire subdivision suddenly looked less like a quiet HOA community and more like the center of a public scandal. Brenda's posture stiffened immediately. Her umbrella shook slightly in her hand. Rachel walked out onto the lawn, carrying copies of the HOA financial reports inside clear plastic folders. Neighbors gathered around her while she pointed at contractor payments highlighted in yellow marker. Every few seconds, another person's expression shifted from confusion to anger. One older resident actually removed his HOA board volunteer pin and dropped it directly into a puddle near the curb. The metallic clink somehow sounded louder than the thunder overhead. Then came the moment everything fully turned against Brenda. A silver SUV pulled slowly into the neighborhood entrance and stopped beside the crowd. County Audit Division. 2 officials stepped out wearing dark rain jackets with identification badges clipped near their collars. The whispers spreading through the street sounded almost electric after that. Brenda noticed them instantly. Color drained from her face so fast, even the television reporter nearest me glanced over in surprise. The auditors walked directly toward Rachel first while cameras followed every step. Nobody shouted. Nobody caused chaos. It was quieter than that. More dangerous. Just calm people finally comparing facts out loud. One auditor opened a folder beneath the portable lights while rain tapped steadily across the plastic cover. "Mrs. Whitmore," he called firmly across the yard, "we need access to the HOA financial records immediately." The entire neighborhood fell silent. Somewhere nearby, a wind chime rattled softly beneath somebody's porch roof. Brenda opened her mouth twice before any sound came out. "This is completely unnecessary," she said finally, but the confidence was gone now. Completely gone. Behind her, Students were already rebuilding the first planter box beside my fence. Fresh cedar boards slid into place while cordless drills buzzed through the rainy evening air. Mud covered their sneakers. Rain soaked their sleeves. They kept building anyway, and standing there watching former students rebuild something the world tried to destroy, I suddenly realized Brenda had made the biggest mistake possible. She attacked a teacher without understanding how many people she had already helped grow. By Saturday morning the rain was gone, but Willowbrook Estate still looked like a storm had passed through it. Not the kind that tears roofs apart. The kind that strips masks off people. News vans lined the entrance road before sunrise with extension cords snaking across sidewalks and camera crews sipping burnt coffee from paper cups while setting up tripods beside perfectly trimmed HOA hedges. The entire neighborhood smelled like wet grass, fresh lumber, and tension. I stepped onto my front porch just after 7 and stopped cold again. My yard was full, not crowded, full. Students, parents, teachers, neighbors, elderly couples carrying folding chairs, teenagers unloading bags of mulch from pickup trucks. Somebody had even set up a folding table near the curb stacked with donuts and thermoses of coffee for volunteers. The rebuilt planter boxes stretched halfway across the backyard now, bright new cedar glowing gold in the morning sunlight. Tiny green seedlings already sat tucked into fresh soil. The sound of cordless drills, shovels scraping dirt, and quiet conversations drifted through the air in steady waves. It felt less like a protest and more like a barn raising from another century. People rebuilding something together because it mattered. Noah walked toward me holding a tablet beneath his arm while his phone buzzed nonstop in his other hand. "The HOA emergency hearing starts at 10, he said. "And judging by the number of reporters here, Brenda is about to have the worst morning of her life." He was not exaggerating. By 9:30, residents packed the Willowbrook clubhouse so tightly people stood shoulder to shoulder along the walls and spilled out onto the patio. The room smelled like coffee, wet jackets, and overheated electronics from all the camera equipment crammed inside. Brenda sat at the front table beside 2 nervous board members who suddenly looked very interested in studying their paperwork instead of making eye contact with anyone. Her pearl necklace remained perfectly straight, but the confidence underneath it had vanished overnight. Rachel sat beside Noah near the front row with 3 thick binders labeled contract payments, HOA fines, and county filings. Every few minutes another resident walked in carrying printed screenshots or financial statements. The pile kept growing. Then Marcus connected his laptop to the projector mounted near the ceiling. The screen flickered once before security footage from my driveway filled the wall. There it was. Brenda's maintenance crew tearing through the garden before sunrise, while violation notices flapped against my front door in the wind. The room went dead silent except for the low hum of the projector fan. Then came the next video. Students harvesting vegetables into paper bags. Parents thanking volunteers. Children painting the original garden sign years earlier beneath summer sunshine. Somebody near the back of the room actually gasped softly when Marcus displayed side-by-side images of the demolished beds beside photos showing grocery donations to struggling families. Brenda finally stood up abruptly, chair legs screeching against the floor. "This is emotional manipulation," she snapped. "The Homeowners Association exists to maintain order and protect property values." A man near the wall raised his hand immediately. "My property value dropped the second this neighborhood made national news for bullying a teacher." Murmurs spread across the room after that. Fast, angry, real. Another resident stood next. Then another. Stories started pouring out everywhere. Selective fines, threats, landscaping assessments nobody understood. Elderly homeowners pressured into paying mysterious fees. One woman described receiving violation notices while recovering from surgery because her trash can stayed visible too long. Brenda kept trying to interrupt, but the room had shifted completely beyond her control now. Then the county auditors entered carrying sealed evidence boxes. You could actually hear the mood change. The lead auditor approached the front table calmly and placed an official notice directly beside Brenda's binder. Pending investigation into financial misconduct and misuse of association funds. He announced clearly enough for every camera microphone in the room to capture each word. Brenda stared at the document like it had physically struck her. Outside the clubhouse windows, students continued planting. Flowers along the sidewalk beneath handmade signs reading Community Garden Day. Bright yellow sunflowers swayed gently in the morning breeze while reporters filmed through the glass. And sitting there surrounded by former students, muddy boots, legal binders, and neighbors finally speaking honestly for the first time in years, I realized something strange. Brenda thought she was defending a neighborhood, but all she ever protected was silence. Spring arrived early the following year. You could smell it before you even stepped outside. Fresh soil warming beneath the morning sun. Cut grass drifting across the sidewalks. Damp cedar and tomato vines carrying that sharp green scent that only appears when gardens finally wake back up after winter. I stood in my backyard just after sunrise holding a coffee mug between both hands while sprinklers clicked softly across the new community bed stretching almost the entire length of the block now. Birds nested inside the maple tree near the fence where the old irrigation line used to leak. Wind chimes rattled gently somewhere down the street. Peaceful sounds. Honest sounds. The kind Willowbrook Estates had forgotten for a long time. A lot changed after the investigation started. Brenda Whitmore resigned from the Homeowners Association 3 days after the county froze multiple HOA accounts pending financial review. 2 board members followed her within the week. Turns out $80,000 in suspicious landscaping contracts attracts attention when residents finally stop staying quiet. The audits uncovered years of selective fines, inflated contractor payments, and unauthorized spending hidden beneath vague labels like beautification enhancements and community preservation initiatives. Watching wealthy people suddenly discover accountability was honestly one of the quieter pleasures of my entire life. Nobody celebrated loudly. There were no dramatic speeches. Just neighbors comparing notes for the first time and realizing how many people had been bullied individually because they never knew everybody else was experiencing the same thing. The old HOA office beside the community pool sits empty now. Last month somebody taped a sunflower to the front door. Nobody removed it. The garden itself became something much bigger than I ever planned. What started as a few raised beds behind my house slowly spread across the subdivision after residents voted to approve official community growing spaces during the emergency restructuring meetings. Families who barely knew each other before now trade tomatoes over fences and help water plants during vacations. Teenagers who used to spend afternoons glued to phones kneel in dirt comparing pepper seedlings and arguing over compost ratios. Every Saturday morning the neighborhood smells like coffee, basil, sunscreen, and fresh mulch while volunteers work beside one another beneath striped canvas tents. Some of the same neighbors who once kept their curtains closed now show up carrying seed trays before sunrise. Funny how quickly fear disappears once somebody finally says enough out loud. Noah still jokes that my biology class accidentally launched a legal revolution. Rachel got promoted after helping expose the HOA finances, and now sends me exaggeratedly formal emails every time the county approves another community agriculture grant. Marcus produced a short documentary about the garden restoration that ended up winning a regional journalism award. Lily graduates high school next month. Last week, she brought me the first sunflower bloom from the rebuilt beds and left it on my desk before class started. The exact same flower that little girl handed me in the rain the night everything changed. I pressed that bloom inside one of my old lesson plan books beside the original cracked garden sign we repaired together over winter break. You can still see the fracture line running through the wood if sunlight hits it right. I like that. Some things should remember what they survived. Around 6 every evening now, the neighborhood fills with sounds that used to bother Brenda Whitmore so much. Kids laughing, shovels scraping dirt, garden hoses hissing softly across the grass. Real life. The kind no amount of polished landscaping can fake. Sometimes I sit on the back steps after everybody leaves and watch sunlight settle across rows of tomatoes while fireflies blink near the fence line. The air smells like rosemary and warm earth again. Peaceful, alive, human. And every time I look across those gardens stretching through a neighborhood once obsessed with appearances, I think about the morning Brenda stood in my driveway calling all this visual clutter. Turns out she was right about one thing. Gardens do change property values. Just not the way she expected. Because what grew here was never really vegetables. It was community. And once people remember how powerful that feels, you cannot bulldoze it back into silence.